Hey guys, what's up? Squatch Talk Live coming at you today with Pat and Ernie. I'm Pat and I'm here with Ernie, and hey, we're back.
Yes, we're back.
Coming in hot too today.
I believe this is episode 8. Is that correct? Yeah,
Yep.
episode 8. We thought that we would talk about a few things, a couple of different topics. Right off the top of the show, I was glad to see on Facebook. I'm afraid I can't remember the guy's name, but something that has kind of irked you and I, Pat, is hearing Bigfooters put forth audio recordings of what are obvious that they think are Sasquatches and what are obviously barred owls, foxes, mountain lions, etc.
Coyotes all the time.
Yeah, coyotes frequently, and it's very unfortunate because it means that poor person who probably has a very legitimate interest and passion in the Sasquatch search is chasing their tail, and of course, it doesn't help the Bigfooters movement or reputation with skeptics when they see people saying, "Yeah, look, we've got evidence. Nothing else could make a sound like this." Well, yeah, I was getting so irked by it. I was going to try to put together several links of known animal sounds like the ones we just described and make a post and, not try to be condescending, but hopefully try to be encouraging to people to realize, hey, there's plenty of fascinating stuff about Bigfoot. We don't have to worry about mistaking other known animals, But whoever, we salute you. We can't remember your name, unfortunately. It's been a few days maybe since I saw those posts, but I was very happy to see somebody else kind of making that point for a lot of Bigfooters, because you need to know.
Yeah, I think you said that it did get posted on one of the Bigfoot sites. I know you're a part of so many, but still.
Yeah, it could have been a few. I don't recall, but it was good to see. I think I remember him posting some audio clips of the usual suspects like foxes, coyotes, and barred owls. And so good on him. And, again, condescending because, bro, how much time I've spent in the woods. And I have never heard barred owls do the monkey call until I researched it. I had to study it. You have to not listen to Bigfooters. You need to, go to Google, go to an ornithology site, and there'll be a scientist with a whole, several clips of barred owls. And until you hear the monkey call, I never would have known ever that, nor did I know foxes could scream the way they did. And now that I've lived in the woods for 2 years, I've heard that several times.
Oh, yeah.
But all the years of all the time that I've spent in the woods prior to living in the woods full time, camping, hiking, etc., I never heard a barred owl do the monkey call. I never heard foxes scream, and I'm not sure I would have known what that was. It would have been pretty shocking. It's still shocking to hear a lot of the different calls that barred owls make, because it's really surprising that a relatively small bird, could make noises like that. So
yeah. But owls, yeah, man, owls can move air. I mean, they have pretty big lungs for their, ratio.
yeah, they do. It is quite shocking, but it's out there, and it's just important to, again, part of research means studying. You've got to kind of look into things and make sure you know what you're looking at, what you're listening to, animal tracks to animal sounds. It's just kind of good to animal scat, all these different things people sort of claim as sign. There's definitive source information online, with just a couple of taps on a smartphone.
Yeah.
For people to find comparative examples of whatever it is they're looking at.
It's just informative, Yeah. And as a general rule, I mean, forget Sasquatch for a minute, but as a general rule of being in the woods, ideally, you want to be able to identify everything you see and hear in the woods.
Absolutely. And the greatest hunt, the guy that's killed more deer and more bear than anybody, but he lives in town. Yes, he spends a whole lot of time in the woods, but it would simply be arrogant to assume that such a person has heard every sound that every animal makes.
Exactly. I just said ideally, but that's
right. I'm just saying, like, I've heard plenty of barred owls do their usual sing-songy call, but I have never heard barred owls make those other sounds. And I would never have thought in 100 years that something that an owl could make noises like that. So it's worth educating oneself, learn what it is that you don't know already and remain teachable, especially in any outdoorsman effort. You should kind of remain teachable. There's a lot to learn.
There is. And, it's just smart to do, period. I mean, if you're going out in the woods, then for whatever reason, just be able to identify what animals are around you.
Yeah.
You're going to want to know that.
Yeah, and it's not condescending. It's not that everybody knows everything all of the time. If a wildlife biologist got a call for a contract on a specific species study, then that scientist would likely do a little brushing up on that particular species before walking out the door with his tent and his microscope.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Everybody can use a little studying time. So anyway, enough with the lecture.
Yeah, it's embarrassing when people post sounds of coyotes, and they're like, "What is this?" It's, oh God, dude, stop.
Coyotes make such a broad range of sounds. They can start off with a single individual sounding like a police siren going off, and then all of a sudden the others will start up in a chorus behind them, making slightly different sounding noises, yelps and whips. And somebody will say, "Well, see, that first one didn't. That sounded different. That must be a Sasquatch." Like, no, man, they make a lot of different sounds. Do the study up on it first, and then you'll realize, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's easy to let your imagination kind of take over again when you're hearing something and you're trying to picture it in your head. And if you're out there looking for Sasquatch, or just listen to an episode of Chronicles or something, and it gets a hold of people. But it happens, whatever.
Yeah, and not necessarily every recording you'll find on an ornithology site, let's say, or some other site of the sounds that small rodents can make. Well, maybe they don't necessarily have a sound of that rodent being torn apart by an owl in the middle of the night.
Right.
So
yeah.
With regard to Sasquatch calls, a lot of times you may in fact hear, you and I have heard some things, and of course we sort of disagree on what they could have been, but all I'm floating here is you may hear a sound that you can't find a recording for, but its tone and its volume and its general frequency and all is similar to the sounds of other animals that you can find recordings for. And so at least just keep an open mind and just remember, animals aren't machines. They're going to wind up making different noises in different situations, like a wounded one, or an attack.
Yeah.
Or mating that maybe you just haven't heard in the middle of the night before, or who knows what. Just think horse before zebra. When you hear the footsteps, you hear the hoof steps, think horse first before zebra. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah. A rabbit distress call can sound just like a baby.
It sounds like a poor baby being murdered. You just don't know. It's almost amazing when you see the predator hunters calling in the yotes with those things.
Yeah.
It doesn't just disturb them so bad that they take up another prey, another quarry. It's really god awful. It is.
Yeah, I guess it's worth it to rid your area of some yotes, though.
I used to go to college in the mountains of North Carolina, and on the jogging trail at night, you would during the season you would hear bobcats. I mean, bobcats were that particular school's mascot, And you would hear the bobcats just moaning in the woods, and you'd swear there were babies and women out there just being tortured. And
Yeah.
it was the strangest thing. I came from North Georgia, but I had not, lived in that deep of woods
Yeah. Yeah.
for a significant period of time, and it was odd. It was very bizarre.
Yeah. It's a little higher elevation too.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, cool,
But
man. Yeah.
we'll move on a little bit here. Let's
Sure.
move the subject on. In our first 2 or 3 episodes, we kind of laid out just a general outline of what you and I thought are the most compelling facets of this phenomenon. And one of them was the correlations and cooperation, you could say, but the correlations between what we hear about Sasquatch and their appearance and their behavior, ever since, going way back to Native American and First Nations legends. All the correlations between Bigfoot behavior, described Bigfoot behavior, and what we know about apes, what we know about known ape behavior, all the vocalizations, the tree knocking, the rock throwing, pine cone throwing, all these different things that are known ape behavior. When you get into Bigfoot research and you start realizing there are so many correlations with the biology and so many similarities between reports just in North America, you eventually stumble across that there are legends in other parts of the world about similar creatures. And again, not to sound condescending, but there's a lot of Bigfooters who just, I think they're just using the wrong phrasing and they get the wrong point across. Oh, Bigfoots are everywhere. They're in every state in the union. Well, just because there's been reports doesn't mean, you've really got Bigfoots in every state in the union. And they'll say Bigfoots are all over the world. Well, they're not all over the world. They're in certain areas of the world where there's the right habitat, a very dense, remote forest. And in the montane, temperate regions of the Himalayas and China, you hear about creatures just like you hear about in North America. And then in the tropical areas like Sumatra and Indonesia, you hear about much smaller creatures, less than 3 feet tall, small, hairy, upright ape men.
Yeah.
And the physical description and behavior described in all of those other legends correlate. They're almost identical to the kind of behavior and descriptions you hear about Bigfoot in North America. And so you start to think, well, gosh, this relic hominid theory, it doesn't happen in Manhattan. It's only happening in these certain areas of the world where there are no people, for the most part.
Right.
Just rugged wilderness areas. And it's really surprising, and it kind of does become a corroboration of what you've already learned about Bigfoot when you hear about the indigenous people's legend and stories of creatures like the Yeti in the Himalayas, the Yeren in China, the Orang Pendek in Sumatra, the Ibu Gogo in Flores, the island of Flores, the Indonesian chain of islands, the Almas in Russia, and also the Caucasus Mountains. So it's pretty darn interesting. None of those legends describe a Sasquatch creature with purple wings. You know what I mean? None of those legends describe Sasquatch creatures that look like a Sasquatch, but they've got big red claws and a trunk like an elephant or stripes like a tiger. They're all describing, every legend has the sort of meets the biological precedent of physical description. A primate that's walking upright, similar to what we see in the fossil record with several examples, and all acting in the same sort of reclusive, shy ape behavior. So it's fascinating. Your thought, Dr. Turner?
Well, I mean, I wish they were strolling across the wide open plains of Kansas,
Right.
but they're not. Wish they were strolling across the Sahara Desert or the ice shelves of Antarctica. Clearly, that's not happening. So there's many places, most of the world, they're not being seen.
That's right. I mean, the theory is they're a forest ape, just like mountain gorillas. You know, they don't live out in plains. They're what we call cryptic creatures, or a cryptic species, the mountain gorilla, which will hide in order to observe. It won't just flee and run away or just attack. It will, you know, seek cover from behind foliage. And the word is foliage, folks. It's not foliage.
Right.
That's a huge one. But they are considered cryptic, simply meaning that they will hide, stay hidden. And again, that's the largest bodied non-human primate on Earth that we know of, the mountain gorilla species, and they're extremely rare. Have almost been extinct a couple times. So yeah, you just sort of extrapolate onto, well, if another intelligent species, especially one that walked upright and had evolved to avoid humans, then yeah, all the descriptions of these legends that are different parts around the world, they all sort of correlate with each other. You know, they all support each other.
Right. And interestingly enough, they don't seem to be have any presence or existence in Africa, the entire continent.
You're right. You're right. You're absolutely right, which is interesting.
Yeah. I mean, God, you could go crazy with the theories of why that would be. And then, but, you know,
go ahead.
And then you've got kind of the opposite end of that, which is anybody who says they've seen one in England.
Right. I know that is a really difficult one to swallow, and it's something that I've only heard about really in the last couple of years, the last few years, on the Bigfoot sites. And that could be because, let's face it, there's a very finite amount of evidence for Bigfoot. So if your online communities and online websites all having to do with Bigfoot, eventually you'll be scraping the bottom of the barrel looking for stuff to post. So naturally, at some point, it kind of stands to reason we're going to eventually see, you know, any reports or stories or legends from other parts of the world, regardless of how unsubstantiated they are, how sparsely reported they are. But yeah, it's difficult to imagine. Looking at a map now, there is forest left in England, and the interesting part about it, they've got some stands of very ancient forest. I've been in them. It's pretty it's kind of a mystical experience. And you know, they're a culture that frankly doesn't spend a whole lot of time in the woods. They have, and they don't have much hunting. There's not a whole lot of reason for folks to go in the woods in England. Having said that, it still is pretty darn hard to believe. Hey, they hunted all the wolves out, you know, they hunted lots of other stuff out of there. They're lucky they've got a deer left on that island.
I know, right? Yeah.
They're lucky they didn't cut down all the trees trying to stay warm.
Actually, dude, the kids will, because of the rave community has been come down so hard on in England, the kids will go out into the woods.
I see.
And they will throw big, huge raves out in the woods and get away with it. So
for them, that would be on a side note, that would be a blast.
That would be entertaining for a Squatch to watch.
Except for the young ravers that were throwing the party. No, but having a party in the English ancient forest would be pretty awesome, especially up in the north in Scotland.
Yeah, it's just not a rave.
Not a rave.
Raves are stupid. Anyway, so yeah, I'm just not buying that, man. I mean, every inch of that island has been explored thoroughly and over again for going on, you know, a few thousands of years now. So
yeah, that's the thing, you know. Since we've become modern with our societies, fewer and fewer people spend as much time in or near remote forest as we used to. And in such a small place as England, where they have cut down a lot of their forest and they don't have that much left, surprisingly, they don't spend that much time in them, culturally speaking.
Yeah, it's not quite the same. Yeah,
more of a neighborhood pub culture and city culture in England, in Britain, but which is unfortunate. So I don't know. To answer your question, I'm not here to put. I'm as far as I am with learning things about the Sasquatch phenomenon because I've kept an open mind despite where my inclinations and information has led me. The more you become informed, you can connect some dots with things in nature. But this thing with the possibility of it in England, hey, the only thing I have to say to folks is about that, you got to keep an open mind because after all, for a long time, people have suggested that the Sasquatch species could be semi subterranean in how they spend their time. Now, we don't know that. It's just a theory as to how something could stay hidden. Uh, if things stay hidden underground, then who's to say? Who's to say there couldn't be small holdout resistance pockets of Sasquatches in the most remote areas that are mountainous that no one in England bothers to go into anymore because there's really no more hunting. There's a little, but geez, you really got to be licensed and permitted out the wazoo.
Oh, geez, no kidding.
And so there's just not going to be that big of an outdoor thing there. So that's all I suppose I can say about it. I think on it,
Right. Well, I want to talk about the Caucasus Mountains in Russia.
Please do.
And because what's fascinating to me is the Zana, the wild woman Zana story that comes from there, and has been now. There's some legitimate science involved, dude, with Sykes, and his study. That was kind of shocking.
And for listeners, we're talking about, excuse me, British geneticist Dr. Brian Sykes, who maybe it's been 2 to 3 years now, maybe longer, did a study on lots of purported samples of cryptid creatures from around the world and did DNA testing on them.
Including Justin.
Yes, including Justin Smaya and several samples sent by Jeff Meldrum and lots of other folks from around the world. Yeah. That's another topic in and of itself. But please continue with what you were saying about Dr. Sykes.
Well, he tested, she had offspring, and this was this late 1800s, I guess, right? Or early 1900s.
Around that time, around the turn of that century, yes.
Yeah, around the turn of the century. She had offspring, and of course, there's all kinds of weird stories that go along with that. But and so there's a lineage there to modern day, and they tested some of these folks that had a connection to her, and came back sub-Saharan African.
And to back up real quick, for those who aren't aware, please look into the story of Zana. I believe it's just Z-A-N-A, I think is how it's spelled, and her son Kwit, spelled K-W-I-T. This was in Russia, and this was a story about a village that was relatively isolated, a small village, and a story about a woman that lived in the village who was sort of ape man-like in her appearance. And much larger, much stronger,
very strong,
much more primitive looking descriptions of this woman. And she was eventually impregnated by one of the townsmen and carried the baby to term and raised the baby, and this son was named Kwit. But go ahead with what you were talking about with Dr. Sykes' finds, because his testing was on Zana. The bones, I believe, were exhumed, weren't they? The mother?
They were, but that wasn't Sykes, I don't think.
What did Sykes test then? The bones were
modern day relatives. Modern day lineage. Yeah,
I understand. So living relatives that are descendants of Zana and or Kwit.
Yes, right. Correct. And so they found the sub-Saharan African DNA, and that was very puzzling to them. And it is puzzling because I have not been able to confirm anything that says that the peoples in that part of Russia participated in the slave trade, right?
Right.
If they did, why not multiple slaves, and why would they go to Africa and bring back a slave that was a woman?
You're right. No, they were not. They were not into African slavery in that area. That was not part of their culture or this small village. Now, it's worth saying from my perspective, the generally accepted theory of hominid evolution and the spreading out of hominid species is that all hominids originated in Africa and then started to migrate further north up into Europe, and then of course developing into modern humans independently, the same sort of species, Homo sapiens, developing, evolving into modern day humans. That's what Homo sapiens is, both in Africa and the other areas of the world where these upright hominids spread out to. So it is odd that while most of these fossils of other ape men, other hominid species, not all of them, but many, have been found in Africa, there are no. The existing legends of hominid species are at these places of the world that you and I are discussing now, and there are no legends of ape men, upright walking ape men in Africa. But not to get too far afield here. So, any Bigfoot-like creature that is discovered and has its DNA tested, whether it's from Russia or North America, it would kind of stand to reason that it would have African DNA, because it would be a species that did evolve from there and did not become anything else, you see?
Right.
So that's kind of credibility to the Almas Bigfoot type creature legend that is in Russia and in the Caucasus Mountains.
Hey, exactly. And the amazing thing was that Sykes was forced to admit that.
Right.
That possibility. It was certainly, and out of that whole thing, and you can watch these on YouTube, but out of that whole experiment that he did in testing, that was the closest to Bigfoot he came, was by saying this was either someone went down there and, procured a slave, or the sub-Saharan goes back further and there's a population of something different going on in the Caucasus Mountains of Russia.
And all descriptions of this woman, Zana, were not the descriptions of an African person, an African human.
No, they weren't.
They were the descriptions of a large, beastly, hair-covered human-like or primitive version of a human, is how she was described, using her to do the work of 3 or 4 people with plows and other things that she eventually learned to do, allegedly, excuse me, because the men in the village would get drunk and have sex with Zana. She had become pregnant on at least 2 occasions, and she reportedly took the baby to the river to wash the baby, and the cold waters killed the baby. And eventually the town's women noticed this, and upon her next birth, they helped nurse this baby. Yeah, they took the baby, raised the baby, which allegedly became Quit. And there are photographs of Quit.
Yes, and he's funny looking. He's funny looking dude.
You're right. He is funny looking. You're absolutely right.
And the stories, even the modern day people that they found who were relatives of Quit, they had their own stories about his strength and some of the kind of extraordinary things he would do. Like picking up tables with his teeth and stuff, which is weird things, and so and I guess it was somebody, I can't remember the guy's name, man. Sorry, I didn't do good show prep here. Anthropologist or somebody dug up Quit's remains, and his skull is much larger, noticeably larger than a normal human skull. It's big. It's got to be 30% bigger, dude.
That's a Russian scientist that did that examination of the bones. I don't want to get his name wrong because there's more than one Russian scientist over the decades that's shown some interest, and unfortunately I get their names mixed up. I believe it's Igor Burtsev, I think is the guy's name, but I could be wrong.
I think you're right. I think you're right.
Yeah, he's for many decades he has been studying the Bigfoot creature / Almas or Almasti legend in that part of the world in Russia. And you know, it's fascinating to think, you know, these legends in these other parts of the world that we've spoken about. Again, they describe the same types of behavior, very reclusive, what would appear to be a very rarely occurring species that has had to evolve to avoid contact with humans, you know, at least trying to at all cost. So, you know, none of these other Bigfoot legends from around the world describe Bigfoots that float above and hover above people's campfires with wings, you know.
Right.
They all
Right.
describe the same types of creatures, a relatively shy hominid species. And I just think that is a very it's more compelling anecdotal evidence, but it's cultural evidence. And there are histories of documented sightings, newspaper accounts, etc., from all of these areas, just like there is chronicling the phenomenon of Bigfoot in North America. In these other areas, there are long histories, not just of verbal stories, but, you know, lots of accounts where explorers or military people or whatever encountered these types of creatures. And it gives the Bigfooters argument even more weight and more steam if they're familiar with these other similar legends.
Yeah.
The argument all the more compelling.
Yeah, man, it's fascinating stuff.
Not to mention, and we can stop talking about this in a second, but the best example of fossils being found of such a legend is Homo floresiensis, or what we call the Hobbit, that was officially discovered and documented back in around 07, 08, I believe, on the Indonesian island of Flores. The people of those islands have long held that there was a species of small 3-foot tall ape men that they called the Ibu Gogo. Some spellings say it Abu Gogo. That's what they called it. Said that these creatures lived in the forested volcanic mountain areas on these islands, in this island chain. And then in 07 or 08 or thereabouts, archaeologists discover the bones of a different species, which at least at that time, they classified as being of the genus Homo. Now they're questioning that and saying that it appears to be more of an apey type species, to use some kind of general terminology there.
Right.
You know, I was surprised that Bigfooters and cryptozoologists in general did not kind of wave the banner of the discovery of the Hobbit a little more, because there's a great precedent of long-standing legend. Nobody in the West believes it, and bam, we find the bones. Here's the bones of the very species that have been described for all these generations. So, yeah, the fossil record is only the record of what we found so far. And if we just found them, who's to say what else we're going to find? You know?
Yeah. And it is surprising that people in the Bigfoot world don't wave discoveries like that, like more, because
yeah,
I don't. It's just it's significant to, you know.
Is it ever?
Yeah, it's very significant to Bigfoot, and it's amazing discovery, and it's like these, you know, we're finding weird things, and you know, there's also Gigantopithecus, which does get talked about a lot in the Bigfoot world, but in such a way as to say, well, maybe that's what they are, you know.
They get hung up on it, and the only reason, I hate to sound condescending, is because they didn't crack a darn book or just spend 5 minutes Googling fossil hominids and just look them up and realize, oh, yeah, okay, gosh, you know, there's all kinds of biological precedent for this kind of stuff. for other creatures being discovered. Not to mention the Denisovans or Denisovans. I think it was
Right.
20. And speaking of Russia, I mentioned them because there's another hominid species that was never known to exist before, just discovered as recently as 7 years ago. And again, it's classified as the genus Homo. They were tool makers, appeared to be as close to modern humans as Neanderthals were, that kind of, hominid species. But they don't appear to necessarily be around anymore, and we have found their fossils. So, like you say, Pat, we're finding stuff all the time. And we have to remember that, ape fossils, apes, especially forest apes, forests are not environments that are conducive to preserving bones or fossilizing bones.
Right. Mm-hmm.
High rainfall, wet soil environments do not preserve bones. Not for grizzly bears, not for mountain lions, not for Bigfoots, and not for chimpanzees. It's very rare to find those bones. So, when you say, hey, the fossil record is by no means thought of as complete by anyone. It's simply a record of what we have found so far. And we're darn lucky to have found any of that, especially with regard to apes of any kind. Very lucky to have any of those bones. So who knows, folks, what else might be discovered that is corroborated by an existing legend. And the bones of such discovery would validate, almost to a foregone conclusion. Well, gosh, here are their bones. Chances are these legends are based on these creatures, and they are more than likely still in existence. I mean, that's amazing. It's an amazing prospect, and there's a lot of evidence pointing to it.
Yeah. It's just when people say to me, it's like, well, we find dinosaur bones all the time. How come we can't find Bigfoot bones? I'm like, well, we did.
Yeah.
That happened. It's a Gigantopithecus is a known animal to have existed, and it was very much as Bigfoots are described, And
it's just one. That's just
one that we found, pure luck.
Yeah, Homo habilis. I mean, there's all these other Homo robustus. Look up Paranthropus boisei. There are plenty of other ape-men species on the fossil record that are Bigfoot-like creatures, period. That's what they are. That's what they were. So, yeah, Bigfooters should know a little more about this because, I think it would also help put things in perspective for the prospects of many Bigfooters, which is that, hey, if these things are still in existence, look how long we have evidence of these kinds of species being on Earth, and we don't have any proof yet that any of them are still alive today. So you can't just expect to have an interest in this and be passionate, whether you've had a sighting or not, and think that you can just spend untold hours in the woods and somehow get proof of this. This is a moving needle in a haystack, to try to draw a comparative analogy. And, you shouldn't have, of course, be looking. My God, if you find a tree snap or a limb structure, man, stop in your tracks and start looking for hair and be prepared to bag it somehow where you're not going to contaminate it. I mean, that, if they exist and you think they built something like that, well, you just found the holy grail of evidence. Swab the heck out of it like a CSI technician would. Anyway, I suppose
I don't know. I don't have the patience for that.
You have what?
I don't have the patience for that.
Well, I guess if people don't have the patience to read, they're also not going to have the patience to, look for hair if they're filming what they say is a Sasquatch created structure.
I mean, it would be cool to pinch some hair, I guess, almost on just a personal level. But I mean, I personally, I wouldn't have any interest in trying to get it tested or anything like that. It's like, I really don't know what good that's going to do,
What good it would do. John Mayachinsky in the early 70s had primate hair from a Bigfoot encounter tested by the animal hair expert on the planet at the time. Now, the link that I just posted to our Facebook page is the presentation where Mayachinsky outlines all of this. So I encourage to listen to that. purported Sasquatch hair has been found many times and has been tested many times in North America. And so far as yet, extractable DNA has not, hair is not like a chunk of skin.
Right. Yeah.
Unless you get a follicle out with the hair, there's only so much you can tell from it. But all of these samples have been verified by independent lab sources to be from an unknown primate source, and never cut. So wild hair, so to speak, with naturally tapered ends, and most all of it lacking what's called a central medulla. So there have been many, let's put it this way, several examples. I'm not going to say many because we're talking about evidence of hair from the most reclusive, rarely occurring species on Earth that we can't find proof for. It didn't happen every week over the last 30 years. Several times, a handful of times, and long before there was anybody who might possibly take the Bigfoot idea seriously in the scientific community, for decades there were samples found and verified by people like Dr. Mayan Chinsky, but our culture and our scientific establishment at those times was only going to go so far with it, and they didn't go far at all. But
now,
absolute proof of physical samples of unknown primate hair have been collected and tested in North America several times. However, very rarely, this happened very rarely. So if one came across, because they didn't have follicles on them, these hairs, if we've only found a handful of hairs, a handful of times, and it's that rare, and then you come across a tree structure in the woods that was purportedly built by creatures with long flowing hair coming off their hands and forearms. And why wouldn't you try? Because two hairs, follicles, one hair with follicle, and then 6 months later, and 2 states away, somebody else gets some hair with follicles, and they can document how they found it and get it bagged up and tested. Bam. That's never been found before. So if people were really looking, I would think any structure that a damn Bigfoot had to build would be a great place to look to see if they left some hair behind, because apparently they do leave hair behind. You see, it has been found and documented, although very rarely.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. But
anyway,
to no avail. I mean, that's kind of my point. Like, no one cares.
You're right. No one cares, and I think that's a problem. That's all. If you're,
I agree. It's just,
yeah.
It's just like going back to the Sykes thing and the extinct polar bear hair that was retrieved. It's like, what? Like, how is that not?
Yeah.
How is that not front page news in some form?
I agree. I totally agree.
What the hell is an extinct polar bear doing in? It was the Himalayas, wasn't it?
And again, folks, that goes to show that when we say that we have bones of a species of polar bear from 40,000 years ago that we believe that is extinct now, that means that science, the only bones they have of it appear to be 40,000 years old. That doesn't mean they started existing at 40,000 years ago, and it certainly may not mean that they stopped existing 40,000 years ago. That's the only bones they have of it. They know it existed, and the bones they found happen to be that old. So, let's say that this initial discovery in Sykes' test of finding DNA that matches in the DNA bank that of a 40,000-year-old bone of a polar bear species that we believe to no longer exist, maybe that means they are still existing. I mean, that's a very
Where the hell did hair come from?
Yeah, where the heck did the hair come from?
It came from the species.
Yeah, how could it match this, this other species? So we're going to call it that. Yeah, it matches an extinct species of bear. The fossil is dated at 40,000 years. Well, that's a presumption to say it's extinct.
Exactly.
You see?
Yeah.
Just like finding the bones of the Homo floresiensis, kind of corroborates the legend. So too can finding sort of current tissue that matches the DNA of something they said was extinct. Well, hey, that opens the case again, and those cases are never really shut. It's just the fossil records, what we have found so far. That's it. So I couldn't believe more people were not just flipping out over, wow, You know, there could be another
I know, man.
polar bear roaming around in the most remote recesses of the Himalayas that nobody even knows is still in existence.
Yeah. To me, that was the most amazing find out of that whole project that he did.
It's surprising the History Channel didn't spin off two more specials just on that alone, so that they could CGI their, you know, their extrapolated visions of what this particular polar bear might look like and all that kind of stuff. I was surprised, like you are, that it
Yeah.
wasn't. Well, it didn't seem to be noticed that much.
Well, I mean, I'll say this, man. Every little bit helps. You know, I don't think, in fact, I pretty much know that no scientist will ever get in front of a bunch of press people and wave a piece of paper going, "We've discovered Sasquatch. Here, it's right here in this paper." That's
Right.
never going to happen.
Right. Yep.
But it still helps because the more scientists that get interested and stop going to Africa to study primates and maybe start going out into the woods of North America to, to explore, right? To investigate, explore, maybe try doing some actual science,
Yeah, scientists that find that interest and do that research will wind up writing the papers that you're talking about, and those papers will bring even more scientists into the fold, which might perhaps, yield some physical proof, at which time they will finally get in front of the cameras. But you're right.
It's
Never,
exponential.
it's never going to be proven, so to speak, just with data.
Correct. And more than likely, but yeah, it's every little bit helps, and I think in the in the world of photography and filmology, every little bit helps too. So if somebody did get a better picture of one, sure, there's a lot of people that will just go dismiss it. Oh, that's fake, it's CGI, whatever. And there's ways to disprove that, by the way. There will also be a group of people that go, wait a second, there's something to this, and recognize it for being real.
Especially if with this technology, different people in different areas are getting similar results that are equally compelling.
Especially, yep.
And their creatures are showing some definite sort of species commonalities in how they look, and people are thinking, okay, wait a minute, you're right. This is being duplicated now in different areas, and you're right. That would be compelling enough to really turn some heads.
I agree.
It wouldn't be conclusive proof of a species, but it would be absolutely compelling evidence that once analyzed, you're right, enough people that started seeing something like that, they would corroborate each other, those bits of film.
Yeah, I agree, man. I mean, and we'll talk about this. We're going to do a whole episode on this eventually. But the PG film has been stabilized and enhanced so well, probably as well as as good as it gets. Without like fake stuff being put in there.
Correct.
And to the point where I think there's already, using that old footage, man, there's already a very compelling case that you can make with the enhancement and stabilization that, in my mind, is indisputable evidence of a real creature. So just imagine if we could get modern day footage.
Exactly.
Easier said than done, but there are ways. And I'll say this again, no one's doing it. Not many people are doing it, or if they are, they're not releasing their footage.
They're not releasing, if they're doing it, they're not releasing their footage, and they're not being all that public about what they're doing, which is fine, which is absolutely fine with me.
It is.
If you get footage, good gosh, I hope we all get to see it. Until then, I'd rather a lot of people just, maybe talk about the science, theorize about this or that, but unless you've got something conclusive, I wish a lot of people would shut the hell up,
Yeah.
Get back to researching instead of promoting themselves as researchers and then devoting a significant amount of time managing their public profile as a researcher, as opposed to really getting out there to try to solve this. I'm in this, as you know, as a skeptic. I do not believe in Bigfoot. I really don't. I'm still open to other possibilities to explain the mystery. But I've done so much research into this, I'm compelled so much that I think it's likely that a flesh and blood species really is the explanation to the mystery. Having said that, well, I'm not sure what else to say. In a way, I'm not sure what else to say. But I'm fascinated by the fact that there could be hairy monsters in the woods, and I really want to see proof of this. And I hope that other people will, really get out there with technology, with whatever they got. And like you say, there's not a lot of people are really doing it. Not concerted long-term efforts.
No, and yeah, I mean, there's so much that would go into it, unless you just got incredibly lucky. And again, and also the whole thing with most people that have random encounters are, they're pooping in their pants, man. They're not pulling their phone out. I mean, they're just not.
Correct.
And so that's why that doesn't happen, But
Correct.
one of these days, dude, there's gonna be a hunter in the woods, and who has a really good blind, and one of these things is gonna be fumbling around out there, not know that the human is there, and that hunter is gonna have the presence of mind, pull out his phone and put it up to that scope and get us the clearest imagery or video of Sasquatch by far that we've ever seen.
It sure would be nice.
That will happen one day.
I hope to see one on, national and worldwide news every day. But
and then his phone will ring, and he'll be a dead man. So
yes, exactly. Exactly.
Silent. Dismiss.
Yeah, suddenly he and his hunting blind just kind of become a burrito for a Sasquatch.
Right. But no, man, there's other ways. There's ways to be proactive, and we'll get into that. That's coming, I don't know, sometime this midsummer, late summer, we're going to do a big, huge deal on that, man. I can't wait.
Finally, maybe let the listeners in on what the Prime Ape Objective is into. Is that what you're alluding to?
I mean, just the big reveal, the plan.
Please don't say that, because that was the term that Matthew Johnson used recently.
Oh,
was
really?
The big reveal, and his big reveal apparently was a bunch of bunk. But we'll call it something else.
Well, we're not gonna do bunk.
No.
We're not gonna do bunk.
But we have plenty other good topics to get into at later dates and further detail. We also have some other guests lined up. Some well-credentialed speakers on all manners, all topics that can shed some insight onto this phenomenon.
Yeah, we got some heavy hitters coming soon. I think the president is going to join us in a future episode. President of the United States, Donald Trump. So he's going to give us the scoop.
And from what I hear, his conclusion is that Bigfoot is huge.
Huge, Lipinity. It's huge. Okay. Yeah, no, man. We're going to line up some cool guests, and if anybody listening to the show right now, you can contact us at primeapeobjective@gmail.com. And if you've got a story to tell, or you're a researcher, or you have something to add to the conversation, and we'll talk to you and bring you in as a guest too. So
please do.
Yeah,
please do. We can the more heads that are together, that are informed heads that are together in this search, I think the better chance you're going to have of finding something, getting some kind of results. So we encourage that, especially if there's anyone out there who's had an encounter they'd like to share, who's in the Southeast, particularly the Southeastern Appalachian area. That would be of particular interest to us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we will also continue to post things on our Facebook page, Prime Ape Objective. Various things that we think are informative, like the John Manchinski link I mentioned earlier. and other related topics.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. I don't know. I guess let's wrap it up.
Let's wrap it up, folks. We don't have fancy music or anything like that, but remember, researching means reading. It includes reading. So don't, it may not be the sexiest thing in the world, but, 10 minutes of reading up on animal calls could save you potentially years running around in the woods chasing the sounds of known animals. Just try to stay informed and look at everything with a skeptical eye. And until next time, I'm Ernie. We are the Primate Objective. And Pat, you're there somewhere.
Yeah, I'm Pat, and this was episode 8. So we'll see you guys soon. We won't take so long to make the next episode. There's just been a lot going on. But thanks for listening, guys, and everybody have a good night.
Absolutely.
All right. Later, man.
See ya.